Hello everyone, this is Rishwant and welcome to Navigating India. And today we have with us Neha Dixit, an independent journalist and now an author of the book The Many Lives of Syeda X, the story of an unknown Indian. In one line, this book is a story of a poor migrant Muslim woman laborer who migrated from Benares to Delhi. And Neha has traced her life from the 1990s to 2019, right? So that's the story about. So we're going to talk about the book. But before we talk about the book, Neha, thank you so much for coming for the show. And I want to understand, how did you end up in journalism and end up writing a book? Because in your acknowledgement of the book, you wrote that you have never read a non-syllabus full-length English book till you attended college. So from not reading anything to avidly writing now, because I'm sure you're writing on a daily basis. So how did the transition happen?
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be on this podcast. Uh, what you say about journalism is kind of tricky. Let me just put it this way that uh, uh, I still can't believe that I have written a book. So now, from now on, everything that happens in my life is going to be a bonus because I grew up in a very sort of a conventional environment where at least in a lot of North Indian families, the only sort of career that is there for a lot of children, my generation, was either you do engineering or medical or you teach. And my parents, I was a science student. And by the time I reached class 10th, I realized, okay, this is not something I wanted to do. They wanted me to do medical. But, and so then one had to answer what do you want to do then? And so randomly this was the time when lots of news channels, private news channels were coming up and whatever. So I randomly happened to say mass communication just to sort of escape that situation. And uh, then I started researching, and somebody told me that, okay, I grew up in Lucknow, you have to go to Delhi and you have to study, and there are lots of these courses, and that's how it happened. But the challenge there was that my family didn't really understand what journalism is. Like, some of my family members said that it is like they did look down upon it basically, and said that this is stenography, or this is not supposed to be good for girls, like good girls don't do it, that kind of stuff. And uh, there was a lot of resistance, but thankfully I had some support from within the family, and I managed to come to Delhi and study. And somebody advised me that before wanting to do journalism, you should have read some books and know about the socio-economic structure of the world that you want to investigate through your journalism. So I enrolled in an English honors graduate program, and that's when I read my first book. So before that, no reading happened except the short stories or the Shakespeare plays that were there in our course, and where we had to write exams and write down which play, which scene, which act. But yes, so when I joined college, Pride and Prejudice was the first book I read. And then, yeah, so from 2003 to now we are in 2024. So,
So my next question is, yes, you read your first book and then you entered the field of journalism. And a decade ago, you were working with a media house, right? And you said you have to leave that media house for specific reasons, right? Specific ethical issues that you had with it. So would you like to talk about it?
yeah, so, so okay, I joined journalism in 2007, and I started working for an investigative weekly magazine called Tehelka. And I was there for a couple of years, and it was fantastic because everybody was very old school about journalism, which means like ethics, and everything has to be corroborated and verified and in depth. And so I also had the luxury where the editorial team believed in like investigating further, so we would take time to do stories and put them out in the public domain, where public interest was the most important tenet of journalism. So that was my initial training in journalism. Then I happened to join a news channel. And so the next 2 years, I was in the investigations team of a news channel. And so I have to say, there's no other word, another way of saying it is that news channels are fairly shallow in the way they research or the way they initiate a debate or report about something. So that was the challenge of the news channel medium itself. But other than that, this was also a time when there was increased corporatization of the media. And so, after 2 years of working there, at one point, a big corporate group had bought a significant share in the news organization that I was working in. And that's when the marketing team came and they briefed us that, from now on, the target audience is going to be the urban rich. And the prototype for that urban rich audience was a 35-year-old male techie sitting in Bangalore. So when he comes back home in the evening, he should switch to this channel. So, which means the headline, the logo, the branding, the content of the bulletin, and the stuff that we are reporting all has to be according to the liking of that 35-year-old male Bangalore techie. And then they pointed towards us because I was in the investigations team, and we were told that you guys stop doing these bleeding hard back of the beyond Cholawala stories. So all those farmer suicides, trafficking, clinical trial, whatever you were doing, police encounters, human rights, we don't want that. And maybe the investigations team should go and do a story on who are the rich kids racing fast cars in South Delhi. So one realized, okay, I don't really have the skill to report on these rich car owning people, whoever they are. And also, one realized that public interest was not the core of whatever we were being briefed about. And then later on, we were also told, I raised my hand and I said, is there a she? Because our managing editor kept saying he should like this and he should do this. And to which the editor turned around and said that scientific research suggests that women do not watch television news. So there is no she. And so why I keep repeating this story is because this also kind of explains what is happening within the kind of institution that is supposed to be looking at public interest. So journalism and newsrooms are supposed to be watching out and basically watching people's back and public interest. But when the target viewership is what is driving news, and which is no longer sort of limited to news channels now. I know a leading newspaper where they have given categorical instruction that the front page is being designed for a person called Neha Chadda from South Delhi. And so that's a fictional name because Neha is like the most common name in North India. So Neha Chadda from South Delhi, who's interested in bags, technologies, and human interest stories. So which means that everything that you put out on the newspaper, on the new front page, has to be driving ads, has to be driving more consumerism, has to be pushing people to buy the next iPhone 75 that is coming in the market, basically that. And so essentially, what I'm trying to say is that, which has been repeated in various sort of media propaganda theories. Chomsky has talked about it in the propaganda model, but otherwise also, which is basically do not do reporting that messes with the buying mood of the viewer or the reader. Which means if you are going to write about malnutrition or if you're going to talk about malnutrition in prime time, means you can't really sell fancy kitchen appliances or your chimneys or modular kitchens. So basically, that's how news is determined. And this is not just here, globally also, a lot of news organizations are taking a similar approach where they are switching health with wellness stories. So not public health, but wellness, which is how do you lose your tummy in 10 days. So this constant switch is happening. And so then coming back to 2012, I realized, okay, this is not what I want to do. And I left my job thinking that I'll find a better job, but I did not get a job at that point, and I started freelancing. And I continued to do it because I realized, okay, there was an advantage because if one organization does not publish my story or my investigative story, then the second will do, and the second doesn't, then the third will do. And that is how essentially I've managed to put out a number of my investigative stories out there in the public domain.
No, I think there's several questions, but out of curiosity, the first question is that we see this lot of shouting that happens in the primetime debates, right? Is this also a strategy or the target audience for that shouting primetime debates is this middle class corporate community?
No, absolutely, because the shouting is basically riling up emotions. There is no, when you rile up emotions and when you polarize in such a divisive manner, where there is no nuance, there's no space for nuance, and when the emotions are riled up, there is no space for facts, corroboration, what is the truth, rationality. There is no space for any of those things. And so clearly, then you are, it's of course like the most common way to say it is, of course, it's entertainment, because people are watching Big Boss and people yelling at each other, and people are watching debates where people are yelling at each other. Also, let me go back to what I said, because it is your target is basically a male viewership, right? So all that fire on the screen graphics that you see, or all the shouting, also is very masculine, right? So it is also driven by what the markets or the marketing teams are telling them, that your viewers are basically men, and men like this, and so which is why go ahead and do it. So there are at various levels this is being done, because there is corporate interest but not public interest in the foreground.
I think one another question I want to ask you from is you talked about your editors saying women usually watch less TV channels, right? So I think will that follow that the content which I'm going to put in my TV is not going to be about she, right? It invisibilizes the women's problems or women's issues coming up in the prime time. So what do you think about it?
I mean, they said that women do not watch television news, is what was said, and this is the world has moved since then. Since 2012, the world has moved to digital, and I have even now recently, till 3-4 years back, there was a huge global study which said that millennial women are accessing internet a lot, right? And so the result, the conclusion or the conclusion of that report was that uh, the millennial women is a huge market, so a lot of news organizations should come up with stuff that they're interested in. And the report said that women are not interested in hard news but near news. Now, near news means wellness, like I told you earlier, wellness, positive stories, and career interest stories. Which means, again, like I told you, how to lose your tummy in 10 days, or how to, which lipstick shade to wear to work, and how to style your skinny jeans into a newer, trendier thing. And that's what the reporting is about, which is why Washington Post launched the Lily, and Times of India launched iDiva. Yeah, this Indian Express launched Evesley, and many other news organizations similarly opened different portals for women. Right. So that's the understanding, and this market research is absolutely flawed, because there are a lot of challenges posed to such a report, where they say that okay, this is, or it has been uh, challenged the veracity of the things that have been put out in this market research. But because the interest is to make money, which is why, or to sell more lipsticks, or to sell more baggy jeans, and which is why these things are put out. The other thing is that most of our news organizations, they are like the rest of the world. They are patriarchal, they are sexist, they believe in the same regressive ideas about how people should be on the basis of their gender, rather than pushing back those stereotypes. So they do not have a gender lens, right? So what even the most progressive news organizations that I have reported for, or I have walked in, have said, oh, we report a lot on gender. This has changed because after 2012 anti-rape movement, at least news organizations can no longer dismiss stories on sexual violence. Before that, a lot of us would try to pitch stories and there was no scope. But even the stories on sexual violence, they are done in the most sensationalist way. There is, and like I said, the progressive newsrooms, or all newsrooms who want to be covering women's issues and want to sort of beat their chest saying that we do it the best, they also only understand quote unquote women's stories as sexual violence, or something related to period leave or maternal mortality health. Why I say gender lens is missing is because even if you're doing a story on smart cities, that is also a story that has various gender intersections. How you design a smart city affects people of different genders in different ways. How you are putting out your railway budget also affects people of various genders in different ways. Right? So that intersectionality that is supposed to be there that cuts across all kinds of stories is missing in newsrooms. So they feel very proud that once in a while they did a story on sexual violence, and the most sensationalist way when there's violence involved. But they don't do any stories on labor rights for women. They don't do any stories on gender pay gap. They don't, and once every year you see those silly stories come out when the union budget is supposed to be presented. They will just go to some women and ask, is this going to affect your grocery budget? As if women cannot speak about aviation budget, right? Or they cannot speak about defense budget. The only thing they can speak about is the defense, or is the grocery budget. And similarly for a lot of transgender people, right? You will only bring in trans people when you're talking about the transgender act or transgender bill or something. Why don't you have people from various genders discussing things across the table, right? People, regardless of their gender, can have opinions. And again, there is a research that says that in Asia Pacific, women appear as news sources. So when I say sources, people who inform or tell or educate you about certain issue that you're covering. Only 19% of the cases, women are the sources in the news that is reported around Asia Pacific. And that too only for their personal opinion. They're not brought in as experts. So when there is a sexual violence case, you will bring in a woman lawyer, as if that woman lawyer only knows about sexual violence and nothing else in the Indian Constitution. So that is the kind of stereotyping that continues to be there now, not just earlier when I was talking about news channels, which are sort of redundant in some ways, to even the digital platforms or the models that they're emulating from the past.
I mean, if I can ask a further question from what you have said, because you have mentioned Nirbhaya, right? And this is something which I've been reading in some research papers, which is the classist nature of this violence reportage, right? Now, the Nirbhaya happened, and the Calcutta rape case, which is the most recent episode of violence against women, which got huge prominence after Nirbhaya. And the accusation is that it's not like violence doesn't happen in rural India, or violence of similar uh, brutality doesn't happen against women. So why only some specific cases are getting the more limelight in the media, right? And it is like a middle class hurt, right? Because the one who got attacked in Nirbhaya case is a student in the middle of a national capital, and here it's a doctor, right? So is there a very classist nature to what stories the media will be interested in when it even comes to violence?
No, absolutely. The way media covers issues, and now, like lots of other journalists have said this about class, about labor, media is absolutely elitist in the way any kind of conversation happens, not just about sexual violence, but anything else, right? Like, how many times do we see a debate on the number of fires in Delhi factories, or the kind of strikes that are happening across the country right now? It's just not present, right? The fact that so many automobile workers for so many years, every year we see like a big protest and a strike, but it is never reported. So that comes in definitely because of the nature of the corporate media that exists now, where you are constantly trying to report about people who can buy the things that you're selling in your ad break, or the people who can access internet in the digital space. So even the digital space, they say that they're alternate media and they're trying to push back against the corporate media, but a lot of reporting is targeted or driven by the keyword searches on Google, right? That is a lot of newsrooms. I know the digital newsrooms that have editorial meetings in the morning where they see what keywords are trending on Google or Twitter, and accordingly they decide their stories for the day. So that is definitely happening. And of course, apart from the corporatization, you will also see that there's a corporate political nexus in the media. So it was, of course, corporate driven, but now there's also a corporate political nexus where corporate houses, in tandem with political parties that they support, are doing certain kinds of stories. So that has further sort of polarized, and in fact, the news organizations are losing credibility. I'll give you an example. I was in Azamgarh in 2022 reporting on UP elections, and I was in a village, and I was walking around, and an old person called me and said, "Are you a YouTuber?" And I said, "No, I'm not." And I said, "I'm a journalist." And that old person replied and said, "Then I will not talk to you." And what it means is that the people who are identified as journalists, the people who do practice journalism or part of the media, have lost so much credibility amongst people that people are actually trusting YouTubers, because that for them, they think, okay, they speak our language, they report on our issues, maybe these are our local people who we understand and who we know and who we can approach, and at least they will put out stuff that comes from the ground. So that is the kind of discrediting of the media that has happened on the ground. It has happened because of the kind of elitism and because of the kind of partisan nature and the corporate political nexus that exists in the news organization.
Well, that is extremely scary, right? When the local people don't want to talk to journalists, and there is this wave of Instagram influencers about whom you touch a little bit in your book. Would you like to reflect on that nexus of the tussle between influencers and the journalists?
Okay, I don't know if I can with confidence say what is the tussle, but let me give you examples, right? The bit that you mention in the book, where Syeda, who's the protagonist of the book, her daughter at one point works in a mall, and she has a cleaning job in the mall. And that is also the time when Swachh Bharat was launched by the PM Modi. And an influencer comes and does a video on how dirty or messed up the toilets were in the mall, and puts it out. And and because of that, Reshma Saida's daughter gets like a big uh, uh, scolding, and her colleague Dolly also gets scolding. And then they say that, Swachh Bharat is about public toilets, but nobody is going to go to a public toilet and do a sort of a reel on how dirty they are. And that is precisely the nature of social influencing in India right now or across the world, because it is completely driven by, again, middle class and upward concerns. It is completely removed from the realities of most of the people. And it does not takes into account any kind of places or issues that the people and the public are sort of concerned with. So it's really easy to go to a mall and do that. And the difference now that you ask me is that a journalist is always supposed to put out public interest. And anything that you're reporting has to do with public interest. A social media influencer is probably driven by content. And which is why many of us are always disturbed by the fact when people mix up journalism with content, even, in terms of the words that are used, what is the content? And you say, okay, content is different and journalism is different. That's precisely what one has to look at. But I also want to say that many of us are still able to say this is the difference, but most people don't make that difference any longer. They don't differentiate any longer. And that is where the crisis is for many people like me as journalists, that how do we even address it?
Right, the content versus journalism, and also because the quickness, right? Because when you're talking about media, most media houses have no time. They have to quickly put out the stories, because of which they might be missing some facts. There is no enough research. But
For a journalist, like you said, for any kind of journalism, you have to corroborate the information, right? So if just because you are telling me that, Neha, I slapped that person, I can't just put that video out if I'm a journalist. I have to verify it from at least 3 different sources whether this has happened or not, which is not the case with an influencer, because the influencer is driven by the virality of that video, right, and the quickness of it. And so there is no onus on them to verify it, so they will just put it out. That is why a lot of journalists are frustrated that, we are constantly being demanded by corporate newsrooms to put stuff out, but we can't really put that stuff out because we know ethically there are questions involved. And so those boundaries are being blurred, or people are being pushed to blur, and that's where the problem is.
I mean, there is a lot to talk about ethics of the journalism. But before we go there, right, talking a little bit about the book, right? And you say one of the main reason for you writing this book is to fill the gap, which is the lack of intersectional gender lens in the mainstream media, right? So tell us, what is this intersectional gender lens?
Okay, I don't know. Okay, now I'm feeling a little pressured that you're asking me that. But see, it was born out of my own frustration that what is this? Like, Like really, like you telling me to go and do an investigation on rich kids racing fast cars. Like it was almost like, no, this is not journalism. This is not what I can do. Or maybe I'm silly enough to say, okay, I can't do it. And maybe I could have earned a lot of money, but we are all silly and diseased in some ways that we put ourselves through the suffering. But the other bit is the fact that how can you deny such a, like the majority of the world or of the country that is not part of this world? So you are telling me what is bleeding heart story is actually a series of stories that are reported about farmer suicides in Bundelkhand, where people are killing themselves for not being able to pay a loan of 15,000 rupees, 20,000 rupees. And you say that that's a bleeding heart story that we don't want. Or the fact that, you're doing stories on I was doing stories on human trafficking where people were being sold off for 500 rupees and 250 rupees. And you are saying that that story does not deserve space, and a story that is about rich kids racing fast cars deserves your space. So it is actually very frustrating, and almost when I say it now, I have goosebumps again when I say this, because this is how people in decision making positions are telling you to do reporting. Then there is something really sad, and that clearly says the kind of weakening of the democratic structures of our country in the last few years. So for me, I realized, if you're talking about sexual violence is just one part of a person's life. And after 2012, because I said there was more scope to do stories around sexual violence, I also happened to do many of them. For example, I'll give you one thing that stood out to me. There was a big riot in 2013 in two districts in UP called Muzaffarnagar and Shamli. And I had covered those riots, and I'd met several sexual violence survivors during the riots. And long story short, some of them, out of the hundreds of mass rapes that happened, only 7 of them went and filed cases against the accused. Once they filed the cases, after a few months, they had to go back and work in the farms of the same accused people who had inflicted that violence on them. They were farm laborers. The majority of the women in this country are farm laborers. And after that, home-based workers, the people that I mentioned in my book. So a person facing sexual violence is just one part of it. So even my reporting, I reported about the violence, I reported about the filing of cases. But what is their life after that? Which means a lot of socioeconomic concerns of a person's life are nowhere part of this big picture that we are reporting. It is all, my reporting was episodic in nature. I also met a woman from Mirzapur in UP who used to work in a stone quarry, and she had faced sexual violence and she was pregnant as a result, but she could not afford to take few days off to get an abortion done, and as a result she had to carry that child, right? So sexual violence, yes, the media is focused on that, but what happens to people after that is the story I wanted to understand. So in 2013, when the amendments were made in the rape law, and we also had a separate law on the prevention of prevention of sexual violence at workplace act, even then that did not take into account the majority of the people in the unorganized sector, which is more than 90% in this country. And then the smaller part of it, which is this cheap female labor economy that is nowhere in conversation. So for me, it was both driven by the frustration of what I was being told is important as a story and what is not, and the fact that I also wanted to understand, okay, these things are happening in women's lives. Not everybody has the luxury to even report it, to follow it through, to get a closure, to get some kind of closure to this. But how are they dealing with it? So it started with that, and then the story went on to look at migration and urban poverty and many other things in Delhi.
Okay, I think so. Really appreciate you for the work that you have been doing, right? And surely, if you are placed in a corporate job doing the news they want, you would have been better earning, right? But you choose this hard path. But one thing that happens in the work, the kind of work that you are doing, is we get overwhelmed, right? The emotions come into picture. So how do you deal with that, right? Because There should be a line between emotion and the truth when you're writing the particular story, right? How do you?
Can I tell you practically? Practically, I'm a very switch on, switch off person. When I switch on, I will do whatever needs to be done. And when I switch off, then it's switched off. That's the only way I have been able to survive for the last 17 years because I can't do this 24/7. That's so 10 hours of my day, I will do it, but not more than that. Maybe. That's the only way it is working.
You're
Yeah.
lucky you're able to do a switch off or not. Okay, I want to ask you about this. In this, again, the kind of work that you are doing, right? The threats, right? Life threats and intimidation is a constant, right? So how do you deal with? Why are people not able to scare you?
I am very scared. No, no, nobody who's saying I'm not scared. I don't know if that's true. Of course, it scares me. There are three things to it. I have a big support system. I have the support system of my friends, my partner, fellow journalists, fellow people who have the same worldview as me. So I have a big support system. So that support system means I can pick up the phone and rant for 1 hour and they will listen. That is the kind of support system I have. So I'm very lucky that way. That's definitely there. The threat is kind of the ways of threats in the way one has been threatened has changed in the last 12-13 years. So the first time I got like major threats was when I wrote about khap panchayats. These are clan councils in North India which were regularly issuing diktats of honor killings against people who were choosing their own partners and going for self choice marriages. So this was in 2008 or 9 when this was the social media hadn't picked up and people were still blogging and saying that she should be beaten black and blue. And on the ground also, the Kap Panchayat leader would say that if you were roaming around with a man and if you were from our community, we would have like killed you and hung you from the tree, whatever. But that was all whatever. The real threat started after 2013 when I reported about the Muzaffarnagar riots, where they were basically discussing. They were upset that I had reported on Muslim women. They were upset that I had reported about the kind of fundamentalism just before the 2014 general elections was taking over. And so they were, from there, all the online threads started where they had huge discussions about how I should be raped, whether it should be a rose bush or a iron rod or a steel rod or whatever, and endlessly that happened. And to the point where you start finding humor. I remember somebody saying, "Oh, she's the wife of a Lashkar-e-Toiba leader," and I was like, "Why am I the wife and not the leader?" So that kind of, and then you stop paying attention. So it was normalized, unfortunately, because both the social media platforms and the government are not interested in stopping it. The government and the people in power are, in a way, pushing this. We've had several of those reports that tell us that certain political parties are doing it, and the social media that is platforms that are driven by engagement, so they don't want to stop it. So there came a point when one was at the risk of saying desensitized, but I am desensitized to it a little bit. But the actual threats, again, the other kinds of threats that have started is that in 2016 I had done a story on how the Hindu fundamentalist groups are trafficking children from the Northeast and taking them to other parts of India for the purpose of uh, uh, political indoctrination. So I tracked down 3 RSS outfits that had taken 31 tribal girls from Northeast, from Bodo and Santhal tribes. They were between the age group of 3 to 11. And these were 31 girls where the parents were promised free education and lodging. But once the girls were taken, the parents just couldn't contact their daughters at all. And these were really remote places, and parents were completely from a very impoverished background. And so one realized that this is basically the same pattern that was done in Australia and Canada, where a number of indigenous and aboriginal children were taken by Christian missionaries for in residential schools and completely stripped of their culture, language, food, and history. And that was something that was being repeated here. And in that investigation, I found out that in the last 5 to 7 years, almost 10 lakh children have been taken away in this manner. And so I traced those 31 girls, and I had papers and I had proof. So they could not counter any of the facts that I had reported in this story. And I traced those girls also, 20 in Gujarat and 11 in Patiala, where those Bodo girls were no longer allowed to speak their own language, but they could only speak in Gujarati or Hindi. They were not supposed to eat meat. And one of the 7-year-old Babita, she told me that how when she wants to grow up, she wants to conduct self-immolation to save herself from Christian and Muslim invaders. So, and they did not get any formal system of education. They were given bhajan and sanskar classes and in political Hinduism and Hindutva. That is what they were being taught. Once the story was out, 3 criminal cases were filed against me. And what has happened in the last 10 years is, I mean, no journalist is scared of cases. Like we were initially told that if you get a defamation notice, it means a badge of honor, means somebody is reading your story. So one is prepared for that. But last 10 years, what has happened is that this government and now many political parties have started filing law and order related cases against journalists. And the moment you file criminal cases, it takes longer in the court of law. So this is my 8th year of going to Guwahati. In fact, day after again, I'm going for my hearing. And so that's one kind of suffering. And I want to say that I am privileged enough to be able to travel from Delhi to Guwahati every 3 months, 4 months to pay for legal expenses and travel expenses. But not everybody has that privilege. So that is one problem. The other kinds of threats are where, I had done a story in long investigation on how after Adityanath became the chief minister of UP in 2017, thousands of police encounters were done in the first 6 months, which were being put out as an achievement by the state government. And I found out that out of the 1,200 police encounters where almost 300 people were killed, most of those encounters were basically not chance encounters, but pre-planned killings. I had investigated that, and then I got a call from the chief of the UP police saying that, till when are you going to do this? Because we know where your mother lives. So that is the kind of threat that is troubling, because when your family members are sort of threatened and people directly tell you, that is a problem. Then in 2021, again, after 5 months of being stalked and getting phone calls from 200, 400 different phone numbers saying, you're sitting in your balcony and we're going to come throw acid on you, or you've just bought this vegetable in the market, we're going to come and gang rape you. Somebody tried to finally break into my house in January 2021. And they were unsuccessful. By the time I came out, they ran away. But the police did not do anything about it. Now, why I'm telling you about all of these is because now the nature of threats is it's all mixed up. We don't know if it's online is pushing the legal threats and the legal threats are pushing the physical attacks, or it's which way is it going. But I want to say that the state is not interested in curbing this. The state is not serious about it. And I'm still privileged enough to be able to sit here and talk about it. I'm still not in jail. But a lot of my colleagues are in jail. A lot of my colleagues have suffered drastically. A lot of my colleagues and their families are suffering because they are in jail or they have been incarcerated. So that is, and when this starts happening, journalism becomes the profession of people with a certain caste class privilege, which means only when you have the resources to be able to do the ethical journalism that you want to do and fight all these things is when you can continue. Otherwise, you can't, and that is a huge challenge in itself. It's not good for us. The reason I speak about it because it needs to be spoken, right? I can still talk about this. A friend of mine in Jharkhand, his name is Rupesh Kumar Singh. He's been in jail in Jharkhand for the last 1.5 years, and how his family is suffering, how his son is suffering is something that's terrible. Nobody should be going through. Or the fact that Fahad Shah in Kashmir was in jail, or so many Siddiq Kapan. We have so many names, and these are the names we know. But in smaller places, two-tier towns, people writing in non-English languages, people suffer, and we don't even hear about it. So the question then is, nobody has the moral right then to other other people, what kind of journalism are you doing? If there is no resource, everything has become a gig economy. News organizations do not support you when you are attacked by the people you have reported about. Then why should people be forced to take that risk unless there is some padding?
Now, I must admit, I was genuinely not prepared to hear such hard-hitting answers.
Like I said, it's all I'm fully desensitized. I can talk about whatever.
I'm sorry for everything that you have been through, and I truly appreciate for the work you're continuing doing, and wish we all be a part and support in any ways we can. So all the listeners, whoever is listening this. So now I want to talk about your book, right? Sudden transition from what we have been discussing. How did this book happen?
So the book happened, like I told you, that I was so frustrated in that news channel that I left. And I thought, okay, let me just figure out what is happening and where is public interest. And not that I'm such a great person, but just the fact that it was not going with whatever I had learned about journalism. So the book happened. I started working on it in 2014 when I wanted to look at a lot of working class neighborhoods in Delhi. Unlike Kolkata and Bombay, in the Delhi master plan, the larger industrial units were ruled out. So Delhi has a number of small and medium manufacturing areas across its districts. And I also looked at some reports which say that out of the number of migrants that come to Delhi every day, 35,000 stay and never go back. So I wanted to look at what is feeding these manufacturing areas, who are the people who are working in these manufacturing areas, and who are the women who are part of it. And that's when I started going to Northeast Delhi. Northeast Delhi is an area that borders UP. So Ghaziabad is on the other side and Delhi is on this side. And there are a number of, again, industrial units there. There's a big one, organized one, which is called Tronika City. But I went to Karaval Nagar, which is a place which has a large number of like small plastic manufacturing units and scrap yards and nail paint factories, almond cleaning factories, and some such. That's where I happened to meet Syeda, and I heard about how Syeda was part of a strike in 2009, where a lot of women who were engaged in cleaning almonds and breaking the shell and packaging the almonds, they had protested against the wages that they were getting. So they were getting 30 rupees for one cleaning a 25 kg bag, and that took 12 to 16 hours a day. And they had pushed for better wages, and finally they were successful and they got a 10 rupee raise. But because of that strike, the almond rates globally shot up, because if you understand the chain, all these California almonds and almonds from the West and even the walnuts, they all come to India. They are cleaned, they are taken out of from their shells, they are cleaned, they are packaged, and they are sent back. So while the women are getting 25, 30, 35 rupees for one bag, the supplier who's finally exporting it back is getting 1,700 rupees for that same bag. So that is the parity, that is the kind of gap that we are pay gap that we are looking at. So that's when I met Syeda and I started talking to her, and then one realized how this home-based workers economy is so big in the country. And like I said earlier, after farm-based work, home-based work is the biggest employer of women in India. And what is home-based work is basically where you are paid per piece. you're a piece rate worker and you can do that work at home, or what I say, factories, which is the term that a lot of workers, women workers use. They are not technically factories because they do not have any license or accreditation or any kind of clearance. But these are basically small rooms where women come together, they do their work, and they are paid per piece. So usually in India, you're paid per 12 dozens. So you're paid per 144 pieces that you make. So I realized Saida, apart from cleaning almonds, was making helmet parts, to making cycle walker parts, to making door hinges, to cleaning almonds, to packing stationery, to stitching Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan bags, to cutting threads for a pair of denims, to making all your festival goodies, to making your Christmas decorations, to making your string lights, to putting your curtain rods, assembling them, or to put making car wipers. So basically, Saida in the last 30 years had done 50 jobs, and she had worked more than 12 to 16 hours every day. And in spite of that, she only managed to make 1/5 of the minimum wage that she was supposed to get. So that is essentially what I tried to look at. And then one realized that apart from this story of the economy and the labor practices and many other things, Saida's story was also, in a way, the story of India, because it also spoke about migration, unemployment, gender, urban poverty, lack of civil amenities, the lack of infrastructure, the socio-economic differences, caste, class, and all those things. So that's why I started working on this book in a more committed manner.
No, that you have spoken about the employment aspect. To speak a little bit more about it, right? You mentioned like she did more than 50 jobs, right? She could recall that she did more than 50 jobs, right? And in your book, you write how this was, as you write, right? I quote, multi-layered local subcontracting network for manufacturing work, stop quote, which is a post 1991 reforms phenomena. And you have spoken about how many of these women workers who are actually earning more than their male counterpart at home are saying they are doing merely a supplementary work, and many of them don't call themselves even workers, right? They don't know that they are working though. So how do we tackle this? And also how these home-based workers, women, have no legal protections like the workplace, right? And you said that's why contractors give them the home so they don't have to ensure the living conditions. And also how they are exploited because instead of the time based, they are being paid piece based work based on number of piece they represent. And also one more point, how they're easily replaceable, right? If you don't attend the job once, the next day there is somebody, right? How do you look at all these things?
So, two things. One thing that I understood, of course, there is patriarchy, there is all of that. But one thing that drives this home based economy is the fact that men have a higher sense of self worth. So if they are not being offered 250 rupees a day, they will sit idle the whole day, not take up anything, but not take that work. As opposed to women who are taking this work up for 70 rupees, 80 rupees, 90 rupees. And like you said, when you talk to them and when you ask them, are you a worker? They'll say no, firstly, because a lot of them are not allowed in their families to say that they work, because of that whole patriarchal idea that women shouldn't work and the men are the primary breadwinners. So you don't want to disrupt that equation. And secondly, also because you don't have the confidence to say that you are a worker. You only say that, oh, I do this work, because you say, when no, you are working, how can you say that you're not a worker? And then they say, no, this is just to buy grocery, or this is just to buy milk for the day, or this is just to pay for people's tuition fees. So when there is no acknowledgement that you're a worker, how do you even start pushing for better wages? Not that anybody is ready to give you better wages, but even to demand that does not. So that is absolutely essential in this conversation, and that comes in handy for a lot of subcontractors, contractors, suppliers, exporters, because women are ready to do this work for whatever little is being offered. So which is why we don't know why somebody is being paid 5 rupees to stitch a football that will be sold for 1100 rupees in a mall. Who's deciding those rates? Those rates are being decided randomly, and all that cost cutting is being done at the wage that is supposed to be given to the workers, not at the higher level. So that is something that needs to be looked at. So if I try to explain this kind of supply chain to you, multinational companies or even domestic markets, for example, like I mentioned in the book, that you suppose the World Cup is coming, right? So people want to buy football. Suddenly, everybody wants to buy a football or a soccer ball. Those balls come from abroad to the suppliers. The suppliers give it to the contractors. The contractors give it to the subcontractors. Sometimes there's a subcontractor. That subcontractor gives it to the home based workers, that raw material, and explains to them roughly this is how you're supposed to put this together. Once the ball is ready, you paid 5 rupees to make that ball, which takes 5 to 6 hours or whatever. Then it go back to the same chain and finally to the supplier and then abroad. So the multinational companies and even the domestic markets, they use this way because they have outsourced all their work to countries like India and many other parts of the global south, because uh, we have disposable labor, which means that they don't have to comply by our labor rights. They don't have to set up a factory with basic living conditions and basic minimum wage. And they can get this work done at the cheapest rate possible. This is the revenue model they follow. And so in this, Syeda is also one part. So what I want to say is that this cheap female labor economy has been created after the market reforms and after the kind of outsourcing that multinational companies are doing to our parts of the world. We've seen that similarly in garment factories in Bangladesh or in Sri Lanka, right? That this is constantly being outsourced. Big companies are outsourcing that work, using child labor, using extremely poorly paid labor to do this work and then sell it at a very high price in the global market.
I think, okay, getting back to the book again, right? You have been working on this book for 9 years, right? That's what you have said, 9 years, and you did almost 900 interviews, right? I think one major thing I wanted to ask is when we are doing, especially these kinds of the work that you have been doing, the trust building is very important, right? So he will tell me the truth only if he trusts me, right? Why should they tell? So how does this process work? How did you build the trust with the respondents?
See, whether it's field work or whether it's this book or whether it's generally in life, trust building cannot happen in a short period. Trust building always takes time. Trust building always takes a lot of trashy conversation, a lot of serious conversation, a lot of in between conversation, a lot of profound things, but also a lot of frivolous conversations. And then when all of this happens over a period of time is when trust builds. So for me, like I said in this book also, it's why should anybody give me their time or tell me about their life? Because if somebody comes and asks me some private parts of my life, then I'm also going to decide whether I want to reveal them to that person or not, right? So it works both ways. So it took the time it took, and as and when Saida started trusting me and the other people that I speak to, her, many of her friends, is when they started opening up. So to put this information together was sort of difficult. And now I can also say that my relationship with her is not any longer restricted to the book or the source or whatever. In these 9 years, the relationship has moved beyond all of this. Right? The fact that if I'm asking her something about her life, she also asks me about my life. That why am I wearing this, or why am I sitting like this, or why am I whatever, why did I not? All of those private things that sometimes you're like, what? But you have to answer. So that's how it has happened. Or the fact that I remember her getting irritated that after 12 hours I have just made tea strainers for 12 hours. Again, you want me to talk about it? I don't want to talk about it. Right? So you also have to sort of navigate that, because clearly if somebody after 12 hours of working, again I have to talk about it in my free time, of course I'll be irritated. So it's as human as it is for any of us. So that's how this conversation moved. Or the fact that, like we were discussing earlier, the fact that many of the things in the book did not come to me in a chronological fashion. A lot of things, for example, the fact that in the book I talk about how Saida's father, so Syeda comes from a weaving family in Banaras, and her father is not interested in weaving, so he runs away and he joins a Nautanki. So the fact that that whole incident in the family history was such a stigma that nobody would talk about it. Right. So when I kept talking to Syeda, Syeda used to keep saying, "Oh, my father was a tailor. Oh, my father was a tailor. My father was a tailor." And then one day I saw that there were all these film posters in the house, and the children are interested in Salman Khan, and Saida is interested in Tezab, and Akmal is interested in Amitabh Bachchan, and whatever, whatever. And then I started having conversations about films. Is when she revealed to me, actually, my father was a tailor in a Nautanki because he was so fond of singing and dancing and whatever. And this is, it's coming from there. So even in our own narratives, personal narratives, right? When people come and talk to us about, like you just asked me, how did journalism happen? Clearly, I am selecting that narrative and telling you that, right? Till you don't talk to me 5, 6 times, maybe you will not know what I'm hiding, right? It's the same thing here, and hiding not in a malicious way, but just that you don't want to talk about it. And the same thing was there with Saida. So I did not know that she had a son after had another son after 4 years of knowing her. And one day she decided to tell me about it. And then you realize, okay, there's another chapter, which is kind of interesting but sad, but also hopeful, and also speaking about what is happening in India with young people and people wanting to be with the person of their choice, or all of those things. Yeah.
No, I think, how did she receive the book? So did you tell her I'm going to write a book about it? How did she receive it?
Yeah. I gave her a copy also, and she was pretty like indifferent. Of course, she saw all the almond and the plier and the screwdriver and football, but she was like, "Oh, yeah," and like she can't read English, but she knows the numbers. So I was showing her, "See, I've written that you were paid this much for making a photo frame or whatever," and she was totally bored about it. She was very happy that I talked about Ek Do Teen and the Madhuri Dixit song and all that. She was happy about, but mostly indifferent. She was like, okay, chalo, let's talk about what are you doing for Holi. So basically, that was the conversation.
That is very interesting. Okay, because you spoke about Bollywood, a little bit shift again. What Bollywood peeps throughout your book, and there are actually references to many Bollywood songs, right? So what's the impact the Bollywood have? Like, what's the role Bollywood plays in these people, right? We get a sense that how people look at them and try to imitate them, the mobility factors, right? So how else what's the Bollywood in these common people's lives?
See, at least in North India, I can say that this is the most accessible, publicly accessible form of entertainment, and publicly accessible form of emotional expression, emotional support, emotional understanding, and storytelling. So basically, this is it. If you want to go say "I love you" to someone, you know what the template is, and that template is coming from some film that you have seen. Right? It may not happen in real life. No one behaves like that in real life, but this is your idea. So all the aspirations of how you should be, who is a cool guy. So Shazib becoming a bike mechanic and having to ride various bikes every day is his way of thinking, oh, finally I have arrived because I am going to be like the John Abrams and the Hrithik Roshans of the world, who are these tough guys and these responsible but dependable guys who ride a bright bikes, right? So all your sense of self is uh, is being copied. You're copying that sense of self from the kind of storytelling that you're seeing in Bollywood films. So that's why it's in the book also. It's pretty much part of everyone's lives. This is how Syeda deciding, I want to not be in my natal home any longer. I want to get married. I want to run away from this. But my only condition is that that guy I'm going to get married to should also have interest in films, right? So it's as small, but it says so much about the world that we are living in, or the fact that uh, Salman, for example, in the book Saida's younger son, he's named after Salman Khan. He's always trying to be Salman Khan, but he never manages to be that masculine Salman Khan. So it's all those contradictions that are there. They're very much part of our lives. So, and these are icons. These are people who decide how we take action in our life, and that is what is happening inside us, like that.
No, other thing I want to ask you is because it's not like you went with a structured questionnaire and you took the data and you wrote this book. It's a memory conversation flowing here and in. And memory is a liar, right? Sometimes memory does not remember the facts. So how do we make sure we are saying a trustable story, or Saida is telling you the trustable story? So this whole aspect of memory versus truth.
So the only training I have is as a journalist, right? I'm, like I say, I'm not a political scientist. I'm not an economist. I don't know anything except the fact that I get some information I have to corroborate from three different sources. A lot of information that was coming to me was coming from, like you said, memory, through oral histories. And that was also because the people that one was writing about were from the socioeconomic margins, who are a lot of times not documented in the official history versions. So the fact that if young Muslim boys are being detained by the police, there is no record for it. Or the fact that Saida is getting 5 rupees to stitch a football for a multinational company, there is no record for it. So a lot of things that one was writing about, there are no official records for these things because one, the state of course does not want to do it because the state is involved in marginalizing the people that one is writing about. So the state does not want to be held accountable for those violations and exploitations and oppressions. And secondly, the people that one is writing about, again, because it's a feudal elitist world, there is no mention of these people because any kind of documentation also requires privilege and resources, which the people that I was writing about did not have. So how did I navigate anything that was told to me? The fact that there was a strike, I should be able to corroborate from at least three different people of from a diversity of sources who know that this happened. If they're telling me that somebody was picked up by the police, then not just the people living in that area, but somewhere else, three different people have to be able to corroborate that. What it really helped me to look at Urvashi Butalia's book, The Other Side of Silence, because that works with oral history and memories. And that sort of helped me to understand how, because I was constantly struggling with corroboration and wanting to tell the truth. But how does one tell the truth when there is no documentation or a very, what do you say, very privileged way of a privileged system of verification. If what one is writing about is not part of it, how do you do it? So this is largely the method that I've followed, where I have tried to corroborate it. If I'm talking about memory and oral history, I have tried to go back to people who will have an idea about the things that I'm writing about and corroborate.
You write in your book, in double quotes, quote, documentation requires influence, importance, and resources, stop quote, and which the poor doesn't have, right? And so their stories are marginalized. And you connect this idea about documentation in your chapter where you're going to talk about the citizenship, right? So can you tell us through your experience, right? The stories that you have seen, anything about the citizenship that and the problems that going to create if the CAA come in full force?
Listen, so thank you for that question. It's not just citizenship, right? Like CAA, forget CAA. Even before that, people have been suffering because of this this endless sort of documentation exercise, right? We all remember when Aadhaar was being introduced, we were told that you will have one ID, then you won't need anything. Now, again, the other day I was reading that some welfare card is needed for workers, right? Some new thing has come in Delhi, right? So this endless documentation, you still need your voter card, you still need your Aadhaar card, you still need your driving license, you still need your various other cards. So this endless documentation does not stop. And the fact that in a country where if you even enter a very, like, any police station that you enter and you see the record room, we should be really thinking of what kind of documentation are we asking, looking at the conditions of the record room where everything is tied in various red and green and white cloth and you can never trace anything, right? So that's number one. Documentation, again, like you say, citizenship we talk about. Reshma, at one point, like I mentioned in the book, she starts working in a place which was earlier a cyber cafe, but now that everybody gets internet on their smartphone, mostly, I shouldn't say everybody, mostly everyone gets it. She works in a cyber cafe, which has now become a digital seva kendra. And what is this digital seva kendra? Is basically people coming, and when Digital India was launched, India decided now everybody is looking at WhatsApp, so everybody has digital skills to access everything. So let's make everything online. So all your pension, all your life insurance, all your ticket booking, everything will be online. But most people do not have the skills for it, even within our own families, even in middle class families, if people talk about, most people do not have those skills. Right? So what do? You go to a digital seva kendra, where if your Aadhaar spelling is different from your other spelling, then there is a problem. We've seen that in Assam also when an RC exercise was conducted, where because the name spelling was different, people were disenfranchised and they were called stateless. All of those things happened, right? Here as well, you will see it is not just for Muslims. CA, when we talk about CA, it's actually not just about the Muslim community. It's actually about everybody on the socioeconomic margin. Because even if we look at our own documentation, I mentioned this in the book, your name could be Shalu, which could be Shalu, it could be Salo, it could be Shaloo, it could be anything, right? The spellings keep differing. So this documentation is something that has been put out to penalize people on the socioeconomic margins, which means communities, whether it's, let's say, in this case, the Muslim community, which the Sachar Committee report says has been in even in a worse condition than the Dalit community, or the Adivasis, or the landless people, everybody is going to suffer because of this kind of documentation exercise. So that is something that one needs to look at. So citizenship is not is being, how the state understands citizenship is something that is visible, where you are actively not working at making the lives of your citizens easy, but actually you're putting the onus on the people, on the citizens, to keep proving that please accept as a citizen. So the state is not pro-citizens. The state is anti-citizens. And that is reflective in the exercises, documentation exercise, CA, NRC, Aadhaar, everything that we are talking about. So we have to look at that. The state will give you welfare if it does, if you have one document ready. But if you don't have that document ready, you can die, but you will not get your Ayushman Bharat insurance. Right? It's as simple as that. I covered many cases in MP on Ayushman Bharat scheme, where they say that you'll be given 5 lakh insurance and you will get whatever treatment in private hospital. But I've seen number of cases where I looked at one child in Jabua. He fell from the terrace and his skull was broken. He did not have any identification documents because he was 2 or 3 years old. And he could not get treatment under Ayushman Bharat, and eventually he died. So I'm not even talking about any communities. I'm just talking about how the state functions, that you can die if you don't have documents. So if the state is looking at its citizens only through the lens of documents, that in itself is something that we need to question.
Again, going back to the book, to contextualize for the listeners, right? So the Syeda you have picked up for this particular book is what you say, a marginalized Muslim woman, right? And here she faces three kind of intersectional problems. One, because of a poverty. Second, because of the communal bigotry, she being a Muslim. And finally, the gender discrimination that she faces. I would like to unpack all these three intersectionalities that you speak about, picking up one by one, right? First, I want to pick up the communal bigotry, right? Throughout the reason for her migration at many times, or shifting one house to one another, is because of the riots, or is because of the violence, right? So she moved out of Benares because of the violence that has happened, right? So in your book you write how the Hindus and Muslims in Benares are actually the wrap and weft of the fabric, right? And they are living communities. But two things: the communal rights have destroyed that fabric, right? And it's not a right that has to happen in Benares. Something which happened in Babri has ripples and repercussions on these people, right? And you also spoke about how this communal violence, whenever it happens, it pushes women back to their homes again, right? So, would you like to talk about it?
Um, okay, let's look at violence globally, and then we'll come to Saida's case. Okay, lot of when violence happened in Syria, right? Most of the people who were displaced were women and children, right? Each time when there is some this kind of violence, some kind of war, you will see that majority of the people displaced are women and children, and then it has its own repercussions. Then coming closer to our country, in the last 30 years, the kind of displacement we have seen because of sectarian violence in this country, people are not just suffering that sectarian violence and getting their houses burnt and their people killed. What happens after that? If you look at Gujarat 2002, you will see at places like Naroda Patia, where a lot of people, they had to move. A lot of people had to change the nature of work that they were doing. Same thing with after the demolition of Babri in Babri Mosque in 1990s, and even in the Muzaffarnagar riots, I've seen the number of Rohingya people who have been displaced and who have come to India in places like Jammu and Delhi. You will see the kind of repercussions that it has on people. So when we think of migration, migration is always thought as some, in popular domain, they always think of some economic crisis, some agrarian crisis where some man is moving to as a migrant to another bigger place, right? But if you see, if you look at the aftermath of the sectarian violence incidents in this country and even globally, you will see that families have been uprooted and to the point that they had to move to various parts. So Saida also, like you say, was a weaver in Banaras. She used to weave Banarsi saris. Her husband was an expert weaver of weaving very specialized kind of Banarsi saris. And their loom was burned down after the Babri Masjid demolition. And that's when they had to move to Delhi. The kind of majoritarianism that we have seen in South Asia, right? This is a reflection. Saida's case is just an example of the kind of majoritarianism that has led to displacement in these parts. I mentioned Rohingyas. I want to say because I repeatedly keep meeting people who are facing this. When I covered the Muzaffarnagar riots, I saw that a lot of people, after their houses were burnt down, could no longer live in those areas. And they had to move to Delhi or neighboring parts of Delhi, build their houses again. They had to sell off their land, farming land sometimes because they were too scared to carry out their businesses, their work. They were worried about their family's safety. I have seen that for Rohingya people also. I had done a story on a Rohingya settlement in Delhi where I met women. An interesting bit was that they were here in Delhi for the last 7, 8 years. But the men knew the local language, the women still did not. Why did that happen? Because the men were going out and working. They were working, driving auto rickshaws, they were working in other places. So they had picked up the Delhi local language. But the women, after the displacement happened in the Rakhine state in Myanmar, when they came here, there was a diktat that women, because each time there is attack on a community, there's further sort of control on women. So the women were told now that you have to be in a further conservative environment, so you can't go out of the settlement to work. So a lot of women, even in spite of being here, they did not know the local language, and it was worst for single women because they did not have the breadwinners in the family. So they were dependent on doing menial jobs for the settlement where people are anyway poor. So they would fill up water from the hand pump and cut children's haircut or give women bath and get a little bit sort of alms or help to run their families. In the Muzaffarnagar riots, I saw that after the riots happened, there was again sort of further restriction on them, where a lot of religious uh, teachers said that there shouldn't be any music at home, there shouldn't be any TV at home, and it is because of women watching TV and singing music and going out is the reason why this tragedy happened to the community. So it is extremely twisted, patriarchal, but also twisted and misogynist, the system, which is why there's further control on women. For Saida, like I said, it was interesting. Because she told me that in her family, uh, after the riots, she saw that she could go out and work. For a lot of families, she saw that women were further told to be inside. So it works both ways. It has its connotations. Saida happened to be one who could eventually move out of that area and not be further restricted. But there were women she speaks about who were restricted after the violence and further not allowed to step out in public spaces.
No, another question which I want to ask is the marriage, right? Through all this processes, marriage peeps in, right? And you talk a lot of narrative about the marriage in this book, right? Would you remember?
So, like I said, Saida only wanted to get married to someone who was interested in films. In fact, thankfully, Akmal was. So that's definitely there. But her relationship with Akmal is the relationship that most people are sort of struggling with, in ways where there are questions about masculinity, there are questions about how to be like a feminine person, who is the primary breadwinner according to patriarchy, who is supposed to take care of the family, who is supposed to keep the pretense that it's an ideal family where the man is working and the woman is takes the second seat. There are all those dynamics at play, right? So through the marriage, you see how the typical Indian family relationships sort of come out. So Akmal, who's a specialized weaver, who's so particular about even dyeing the thread on his own when he's weaving a sari that he's interested, and then he's beaten up, he's arrested, he's detained, he's imprisoned by the state and tortured. And once he's released, he finds himself unable to go back to work repeatedly. He tries, he falls, he tries, he falls, to the point that when they move to Delhi, he is reduced to a porter, from being a master weaver to being a porter. Somebody who's skilled, so super skilled at his job, to now working as a porter. And then the only next job that he finds is a cart rickshaw puller, and that which he continues for all his life. So here there is depth of aspiration, depth of skill, the kind of torture that is there on you, and the kind of mental health conversation that is never addressed, right? Even now, when you talk about social media influencers and everything, all the mental health conversation happens in a very elite space. It does not happen in this space where Akmal, who has been tortured by the state and who's been reduced to being a rickshaw puller from a specialized weaver, the kind of mental health crisis that he's facing. And he never gets the luxury to address it, and which is why he becomes an alcoholic. So it makes him further incapable of picking up a job and holding on to it. And in that space, he can't be the masculine Amitabh Bachchan that he admires, who is his hero. And so Saida keeps picking up the load and keeps trying to run the family. So how his own image is compromised in that marriage and in that relationship. And that is further reflected when the boys, his own sons, don't look up to him, right? But at the same time, it also changes because Syeda now has been constantly at work and constantly sort of holding everything together. That to a point that she's become so stoic that she cannot hold out any emotional space for Reshma to be able to say that, I'm sad or I'm happy. And so Reshma, instead of finding that comfort with Saida, which is usually said that mothers will have more sort of emotional space for you, Reshma finds that emotional space with Akmal. Right? So how all these things have changed, their dynamics have changed, the stereotypes have changed. And so you talk about the marriage, but it's also a reflection of how in families after families in India, we see a similar dynamic going on where there is no sort of emotional expression, something is stuck, something is hidden, and there are all these kind of dynamics at work. The fact that Saida, uh, in spite of the fact that Reshma is the one who's always there by her side, always doing stuff, always picking up the load, always working as her assistant, also doing good at work, and never abandons her parents. Even then, Saida always has a soft corner for her sons. So while Saida is this dynamic person and a hero in her own way, she also has her own prejudices. So to me, it was very interesting because I could relate to a lot of these complexities, these nuances, where things are not very straitjacketed. A lot of our actions are not determined by rationality, but how a lot of emotions are driving those actions. So that is what her marriage and further, it kind of enhanced my understanding of Indian families and the dysfunctionality.
Dysfunctionality is the keyword. I think because you talk about Saida is a very dynamic person, but there are several paradoxes in her way of working. She is this bold woman who is always ready to fight, pick up a new job, and keep the family together, doing 50 odd jobs, right? When she is not resting. That's on one side. Now, on other side, right, especially when it comes to giving emotional support to the daughter or sometimes standing up for other women, right? For example, in the chapter where you have talked about the workplace abuse, right? Saida actually takes a very justification kind of a stance to it. And I quote you saying, Saida saying, don't do things that make the men pay attention to you. It takes two hands to clap, right? And a conventional feminist wisdom will not agree to these kinds of things, but at the same time she's a great fighter. So what's either to you, like what's her?
What through this book I have understood that every conversation in the world cannot be politically correct. It is driven by circumstances, situations, and the space where you can push or you can't push. So you're most of the time when you're trying to survive within a space without any support system, you come up with answers or responses that help you survive rather than making a statement. So this is what Saida's situation also is, because in this home-based work economy where you don't have any written contract, you don't have minimum wage, you don't have structural support, you don't have state coming and helping you, then how do you survive? Is there any scope? Is there any possibility to say, listen, give me a toilet, when the employer themselves does not have a toilet in for their house, right? Or the fact that there is sexual violence, but what do you do when there is sexual violence? Can you go to the police? Is the police going to help you? Considering the socio-economic structure that you come from, or the fact that you are a poor migrant woman, or is there any activist that is going to come and help you? Because then they tried that, but it didn't help. So how do you survive? So these are rehearsed responses. So Saida's response is also very rehearsed. That just try and get on, move on with your life, do your thing. Basically, that's the response, and I understand that because yeah, like I said, that it is your situations and the support structure that is available to you helps you helps decide how politically correct you can afford to be. So that's the situation.
I think that's very key statement, right? How politically correct we can be will be depending on the circumstances that we are living in. And here I want to talk about the almond workers strike that you have spoken about. It seems to be a very large scale strike, which has affected the global supply chains and almost the almond uh, cultivation and exports, right? First thing, it was in no narratives, right? Even after your book, right? When I was reading it, I Googled it. I'm getting some news about almond worker strike that's currently happening, right? And there were genuinely, it's very tough to find the references of this big almond worker strike. And this strike is especially important because these women are not somebody who are politically trained, right? And because among these home-based workers, among these small industry workplace workers, there is no unions, right? So the unionization happened, and you also talk about instance where when the main leaders of that movement got educated leaders of that movement got English educated leaders are arrested. The women workers who are actually the part of that movement took the leadership and ran that struggle, right? Whatever might the outcome of that struggle might be. Very, very important struggle. So tell us about this almond workers strike and why was it missing?
So like I said, let's go back to a time when corporatization of the media starting. Okay, so all your California almonds basically around the world are coming to India. Now all the fancy diets have almond milk as the milk substitute or whatever, and Karishma Kapoor is coming up with California almonds, and all these big chefs are advertising it. So when that is like Samir Jain, I remember from Times of India in his famous New Yorker quote, he said that we are not in the newspaper business, we are in the advertising business. Right? So the person who owns the Times of India group is saying this. So that is essentially what is determining.
The paper explicitly proves that. Times of India.
So if this is how most people are thinking, of course they're not. If California Almonds is going to advertise, of course you're not going to write about it. The second thing, which is even with the well-intentioned people and organizations, we have to understand that a lot of trade unions and a lot of reporting around labor is around organized workforce. A lot of trade unions work with organized workforces, factories, workplaces. You do the same kind of job, you do the same kind of manufacturing. That is the model that most mainstream trade organizations and labor researchers and activists have looked at. For the longest time, there hasn't been any scope to look at the kind of uh, 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 look at how labor practices are affected by gender, right? One example is your Munnar plantation strike, where finally the women said in 2015 that, listen, the trade unions are not listening because as women we have different problems. So we are going to make our own union and we are going to go and fight it out. This is happening. So the gender contradiction is there because we've seen that a lot of trade unions a lot of times cannot decide whether it's a trade union issue or it's a women's rights body issue, right? So that is something that we've heard so many times. The third thing is also the fact that a lot of these home-based workers, at any given point, they're not doing the same thing, right? Almond work comes to North India in the winters, right? So it's seasonal work. It comes before it comes starts coming in September, October, because by New Year globally there is a demand for confectionery for Christmas, New Year celebration, blah blah blah. That's when the clean almonds are needed. So it's seasonal work. So home-based workers mostly don't do the same work. They don't have the same workspace. So how do you unionize? And they don't get the same wages. So you are making pressure cooker parts, and I am making door hinges, and she's making packing naphthalene balls, and she's making tea strainers. So we don't have that. In the almond workers strike, one thing that was interesting was that this organization tried to unionize them on the basis of their mohalla. So they said that we are going to make a neighborhood level union where we all, what is common is we all live in the same neighborhood. We may be doing different things, but we are going to organize you. You're part of one union. So that was something that has been tried here and many other places, because a lot of this work is moving towards, a lot of work generally is moving towards gig economy. Almond workers' strike in 2009 happened because, like I said, they were getting 40 rupees for a 25 kg bag. And they said, we want 60 rupees because we are working for 12 to 16 hours to clean one bag. And we also want the shells. When you peel the almond, we want that for fuel, and we want to buy it on a set rate because it helps us for that. That was the strike. And what happens also is that almond work is mostly not allowed in residential areas because there's a lot of dust when you break the shell. So a lot of these so-called quote-unquote factories are basically, I've been to many of them. Basically, these are big halls in a building where there is no entrance except a window enclosure. So you have to climb up, go through the window, and they shut it when the shift starts. And you can't come out because you can't do that work openly. You can only do it surreptitiously, because otherwise the labor inspectors or the municipal department or somebody, health inspectors, have to come and shut it up because the dust causes breathing problems and tuberculosis in the body. So basically, you have to stay inside shut for 12 hours, 16 hours. You are not given any tools to break the almond shells. So often you have to do it with bare hands, or you have to soak them in acid. Why this is important is because the cost of a full almond seed is higher and is preferred more than an almond which is broken. So which means you have to soak it in acid and break it with your bare hands, which means all your fingertips, like I've mentioned in the book also, that the women used to joke about the fact that all the almond workers learn to eat with spoon because you can't dip your fingers in the food because of the chili or whatever. So that's when they decided, okay, let's unionize at a mohalla level. And this almond workers strike happened. It went on for a few weeks, to the point that there was violence. People were arrested. People were detained. Leadership was changed, as you said. Lots of men in the families who did not know that their wives were working as almond workers found out. They were instigated by the factory owners. A lot of factory owners were part of political parties. No political party, which is why, came out and stood in solidarity with the almond workers, because of course these were women, and of course there were various other interests. And to the fact that they even went to Jantar Mantar, which is like the designated protest place in Delhi. But nobody looked at that, because what is almond breaking and you're not even part of a factory? So what is the strike? Because the strike we only understand is like big machines and big factories and whatever, and the men are coming out in 2,000 numbers, and then you understand what the strike is. So that way the strike was historic, and to the point that it also brought in the question of what is skilled work and what is unskilled work, right? Because the women, when they stopped doing this work and there was a strike, the supplier said, okay, you are not going to do it, we'll give it to other parts of Delhi. And then they found out that the other workers in other parts of Delhi, when they were doing it, they were breaking the seed, so which was causing financial losses. So skill, what is skilled and what is unskilled also is something that is in question. Or the fact that how skilled can you be that today you can make tea strainers, and tomorrow you can make door hinges, and the third day you can stitch bags, and the fourth day you can make clay idols, right? So that requires a high level of skill. So even the technicalities in which labor is researched in India and even globally needs to be checked and needs to be revised, I think. Because if somebody can do 50 jobs, of course it's skilled work. You can't categorize it as unskilled. So all these things were at play, and like I said, eventually they got a 10 rupee raise After all that struggle, there was a 10 rupee raise. So the factory owner said, we now will pay you 50 rupees. But 50 rupees for working 16 hours. Can you understand? Even after that play. And Reshma, Saida's daughter, she kind of mocks and she says, oh, all of this for 10 rupees. And then Saida turns around. Two things. Of course, this means more 600 rupees more in the month and to be able to buy more food. But also the fact that somebody heard us. Nobody listens to us, but somebody heard us. So even if it moved that much, it's worth it. So there are all those things that happened, and I'm like I said earlier, it increased the global crisis, and all of those things happened. So it was a historic and one of the largest strike of the unorganized workers in Delhi.
This strike actually requires some more documentation. One thing which you already spoken about, that which I wanted to quote. You write in your book, quote, women do not understand capitalism, but when they were sloganeering against it, right? So it's very unique how that consciousness has come about, and what Saida replied to her daughter Reshma when they said all this for 10 rupees, right? Somebody has heard them and they made them hear. So it's a very interesting question. When you're talking about housing, right, you write that saying housing is always seen as an individualized problem across classes, right? And you also talk about the transportation, right? Could you reflect a bit on it? What do you mean by this individualized?
See, look at the kind of, in popular perception, we never, so let me go back to the films conversation. You asked for roti, kapda, makan, right? That happened in the 70s and the 80s. But now, since the late 90s, the kind of films that we see, they're all very individualized, right? All are, at least in the Bollywood films, all the protagonists are from business families with like mansions and have some problem on the side, but not really like a livelihood problem or a whatever, the daily survival problem. Even our small town films are supposed to be small town, but that there is like in a Bareilly ki Barfi, there's no Bareilly in it, right? It's just some random thing that is happening. So, and the women, they're all smart because they're smoking and they're swearing and they're doing that, which is great. But they don't have any career crisis. Right? Most of them are not actively looking at, okay, how next day, tomorrow, what job will I get? What? So those conversations are not there at all in public conversation. Now, housing specifically is all about what is the rent that you can negotiate, what is the amount that you can put together to buy a plot, what is the kind of bank loan that you can get. And in popular perception, nobody thinks that the state is supposed to step in and do something for you, right? That is just not there. So it totally depends on how much do you negotiate with your house owner, that can I come in as a woman? You have to negotiate. No, uncle, can I come in late at work because I work late? I will come at 12. And as a woman, they say, no, women cannot come in after 8. So this is all individual negotiation that happens. When you talk about public housing, the same government is allocating land to private developers to build all these residential societies. I mean, I'm appalled. Today only I saw an Instagram reel. I'm sorry I'm saying reel, but I saw it, which said that the amount of money you can spend in Gurgaon is the amount of money you can spend in New York to buy a property that's 5 times bigger. And I've heard of condominiums in Gurgaon where they have snow rooms, which is basically, you can go and they'll have a room which will create artificial snow so that you can experience snow. So the kind of nonsense that is happening, that the land that is being allocated to private developers to sell it to people who have massive amount of money and they can buy 2 or 3 houses, the same land cannot be allocated to make affordable public housing for people who do not want snow rooms and basically want a basic house to live in. So that's where the problem is. If you look at statistics, you will see that the average space that a migrant in Delhi lives in is lesser than a prison cell in India. So these are the kind of statistics that appear, but housing still is not seen as something that should be available to everyone. It's not there in our election manifestos most of the time. It's not there in our conversations. Jobs, unfortunately, not so much. We've had more conversations about temples and how India is the best in the world, or Italy is the best breakfast in the world, but no conversation about jobs and definitely no conversation about housing. So that to me is a problem, because the way Syeda has lived, or many other places that I've been to in Delhi, because Delhi has, like I said, lots of migrant people come to Delhi and live. You will see, I've been to houses where basically there are floors. One house has 8 floors with 20 rooms on each floor. There's hardly any place to breathe because the buildings are next to each other. There is seepage. There is one toilet for 20 families on that floor. And these are houses after houses. I also describe in the book that Saida, the first room that she lives in Karaval Nagar, it's basically 3 people sleeping next to each other at the width of the house. And so then they have they have 5 people. So Akmal props up wood to create like another tier in the house where Salman and Shahzeb sleep. So basically, that's the width of the houses that people can afford. So, and the state is nowhere intervening or even actively working to make sure that there is at least basic space for people to move around or to breathe or to get air or to get any kind of sanitary conditions to survive in. So, housing is nowhere in our conversation. The state is not taking it up, and even the public perception, it has sort of gone away.
The next question I want to ask is again, quoting from your book, and I quote, there is a peculiar interchangeability between cows and women for Hindu supremacists. What does that mean? What are you trying to say?
I am not trying to say anything. That's what they say, right? Like they have said, I remember Babu Bajrangi saying this many times. Babu Bajrangi was accused in the Gujarat riots and used to run an organization and used to regularly print these pamphlets which says that saving one girl is equivalent to saving 100 cows, right? So a lot of Hindu supremacists think that both the cows and the women require saving. And they are the only ones qualified to protect the cows and the women in itself, across religions, right? They want to save Muslim women and they want to save Hindu women also, right? In different ways. So the entitlement that the Hindu supremacists have, like, the first example is love jihad. I call it the best example of mansplaining, which is basically you think that you undermine the intelligence of women so much that you think that if you show them a pair of denims and sunglasses and a smartphone, they have no brains and they will walk away with anybody who shows them that. Basically, that's what love jihad is, right? That the Muslim men with sunglasses and a bike and pair of jeans will come and lure them and make them fall in love. Basically, women have no brains and they can just hypnotize the women and take them. Basically that. So that's typical mansplaining. Same with cows, right? The way that they have tried to protect cows by killing other human beings is something that, again, what can you say? What can you say about a set of people who think that they can kill to save cows, or they can kill or kind of penalize men because they are saving women because women have no brains? What do you say about it? It's basically that. So there repeatedly we have seen this kind of Hindu supremacists trying to equate women with cows. They have, which is written in the book, and which is also something that we have seen repeatedly. First, after the 2014 elections, they wanted to save women from love jihad. So we had anti-Romeo squad in UP where you couldn't sit with a man in public because a lot of brothers and sisters and friends were also penalized by this anti-Romeo squad. And then UP government had to roll that out. And then they said, okay, we're going to save women. Then they said, okay, now we'll save cows. So which means that we'll have cow protection officers and Gau Rakshaks, where Haryana government started giving I-cards to people saying, okay, we are giving you I-cards, you are cow protection officers and Gau Rakshaks. And then later on, so this group in my book, it becomes a Hindu Kanya Raksha Front to Gau Raksha Front to Unite Hindu Front. So I am not saying anything. This is what they keep doing. And they keep justifying their crimes, hate crimes, human rights violations in the name of protecting cows and girls. So please do not protect cows and girls. We can all protect us.
One more thing that you spoke in this book is about the participation in this violence, right? How for many people, right, it's kind of an occasion where through which they can get some fame and glory, right? And that surely is incentivizing, right? Though they are not concerned about saving a cow or a woman, right? It is because they are going to be seen as heroes and come on Instagram reels, right? They have been incentivized. So have you come across such stories?
Several of them, so many of them, incentivized in many, many ways. Like the people who killed Muhammad Akhlaq in Dadri in the name of, killed him because of accusing him of eating beef, which turned out to be other kind of meat later. They were the people who were felicitated by UP Chief Minister Yogi, right? We've seen number of times that there is incentive to do this. People who have tweeted nasty things about women and cows and in the name of cow protection have got promotions, have been made campaign managers, have been given tickets in elections. So we've seen number of those things many times. And so clearly this is like a quick way of getting fame and getting, like you said, incentives, and to get the kind of platform to become big in the political scenario to for individual advantage. And so a lot of people are doing that. They may not even be genuinely believing in this kind of politics, but they do it because it's there. If you see in UP records, a number of butcheries are owned by BJP leaders. There are so many stories and reports that are out there in public domain that tell us that BJP leaders actually own those butcheries. They are as much part of they own tanneries, they own butcheries, and when they go on public platforms, they talk about Gauraksha. So if there is clear hypocrisy and not even genuine belief in the kind of hate ideology that they are propagating.
One thing through which this propaganda mission, right, the Hindu supremacist runs is on the fake information or misinformation that is going on around, right? You being a journalist, right? So, how do you tackle that, and what these kind of fake informations, right, affect the actual journalism?
Actually, journalism, it only affects when journalists don't do their job of verifying that information, right? A lot of times in the recent past, we've seen that a lot of mainstream journalistic organizations or journalists or popular journalists have actually repeated the same WhatsApp forward that many of us got in our own family groups, and we've fought with our families telling them that don't, this is not true. So it happened in COVID, and it happened, like the most common example is COVID. I mentioned it in the book also. They said that if you put like 2 drops of cow urine in your nose, you will be able to fight COVID and you will not have any infection and stuff like that. So these things have gone out and people have believed them. But at the same time, what is also happening is the fact that there is a political machinery. That is fueling this fake information and fueling this disinformation and putting out fake news in the public domain. And we have not been able to give basic tools to people to identify what is fake news. So each time we talk about fake news, we give them some complicated thing. They'll check the IP, check whatever, what is the IP address. But I give the most common example. Like when people say UNESCO said Italy is the best breakfast in the world. I don't know if you remember this rumor, right?
And Janaganamana is the best national anthem.
Yes. So UNESCO, when did UNESCO? So you have to go back to basic, those, we say 5 W's and 1 H, right? Who said what, who, when, what, why, where, how, right? Why did UNESCO decide that Italy is the best breakfast? Which were the other contestants? Which date did UNESCO announce that? We have to tell people to look at these basic 5-6 things in any kind of information that is coming our way. But the moment you start talking about, oh, use this tool, go to this app, put that link, and then verify if it's correct or not, that's not going to happen. Because we also have to understand that India as a country, for the longest time, is not driven by rationality. You can change, you can You can counter propaganda and fake news not just by rationality, not just by giving evidence. You also have to speak to people's emotions. Propaganda cannot be dealt by just evidence because people are no longer believing. You keep going back to your family and say, no, sound therapy is not going to kill coronavirus. You keep telling them, see this research, but they are not going to listen to you. So we have to find other ways of having those communications also, and not just have the arrogance of, I am giving you the facts and I am giving you the information, and look how stupid you are. We cannot talk to people like that.
So recently, so one of my friend's dad, right? He shares fake information with him, and every time he will say, "This is fake news. This is fake news. This is fake news." And his father used to keep mum, right? Now there is a recent retort, right? His father is like, "I paid you money to get educated, to be educated by you every day, and you say everything you don't agree to is a fake news, right?" So I think there is a trouble. We need to have this conversation, which is really a tough conversation. A last question, right? If you want to write a resume headline for Saida, what would it be in first person?
Syeda is a strategist. She's a manager. She's an accountant. She's the CEO. She's the CFO. She's an entrepreneur, and she's an extremely specialized worker.
What is one thing, if you would want to say, that you expect from readers as a journalist?
Okay, my expectations are very low, but what is doable is something that I can say, which is, I think, like we talked about news and media and social media and the reels and the films that we see, because in a very systemic way, there is an erasure of the people who are on the margins. We don't think of how important a part they play in everybody's lives. So let's just start thinking that if I'm using a pen and there is a refill and there is a spring, who has assembled it? Or the fact that if I'm using a electric plug, somebody has assembled it and put together. If I'm buying a rakhi from a local market, somebody has made it. And if I'm buying helmets on the street, somebody has put that together. And if I'm buying my children's cycle, somebody has assembled it together. Or if I'm wearing a kurta, somebody has done the hemming, someone has done that. So we have to just consciously try and see every single thing that we are using. I'm using a water bottle, somebody has put this and this and this together. Who is doing that? If we just start paying attention and noticing, I think that will be enough for us to think of more profound things that need to be thought about. So just pay attention is what I want. Pay attention to your surroundings.
Hashtag who made this? So Neha, your favorite Hindi actress and your favorite Hindi song?
I have questionable choices. I think
Is it going to repudiate anything that you have said in the last 2 hours?
yeah, I have questionable choices, and I think I'll be cancelled if
Okay. I think I will add the further question of tell me your favorite Hindi hero also.
Again, very questionable. I don't think I have favorites, but can I say that when I was growing up in the 90s, I like Sushmita Sen was like our icon. Like she was this person. Yes, she was this person who was not fair, and she stood up and she spoke her mind, and she went and did whatever she wanted to do and have the partner she wanted to have and not hide it, and have the children she wanted to have in the way she wanted to have. And she went to the court and did a landmark case and made it available for everyone else. So Sushmita Sen was my icon. I don't now everything is, now it's very different. I don't really have one favorite. Yeah.
Okay. Hero.
We were growing up when all the models were becoming the heroes, right? So there was a time when I used to like Milind Soman and Arjun Rampal quite a bit. But yeah, in today's world, I'll be cancelled and whatever.
No,
So
you
yeah.
don't even have to say that. The moment you said we are growing up when the models were coming up, I know where we are heading. And tell us your favorite song.
I have a favorite song. My mind is full of trashy 90s Kumar Sanu, Alka Yagnik, Sameer lyrics. So I'm bad. I don't think yeah. It will make me very vulnerable if I say which song I like. Yeah, yeah.
When are we getting your next book?
Not very soon.
Neha, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you. It was such a
frank
pleasure.
and openly speaking about everything you want to speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure and thank you for doing this.
Thank you.